Hey there, and welcome to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel, we have AJ O'Neill.
Yo, 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 coming at you live from the snow room.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and this week we're talking to Dan Moore. Dan, welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Do you want to just remind people who you are and why we like you, and then we can jump in and talk about auth?
Sure. So my name's Dan Moore. I'm head of DevRel at a company called FushionAuth, and what we do is provide an auth service, kind of like Auth0 or Okta, where you can outsource some of the complexity of login, forgot password, etc., and focus on your application.
Awesome. So, we were emailing back and forth about WebAuthn. I'll admit I've kind of skimmed your articles about what it is and what it does. I'm wondering if you can kind of give the 10,000 foot view, though, for our listeners so that they understand what we're going to talk about, and then we can talk about how to use it, maybe what some of the trade-offs are and stuff like that.
Sure, yeah. So the 10,000 foot view is really, WebAuthn is a standard that's been promulgated by the W3C that exists and is implemented by all major browsers that exposes strong forms of authentication that are typically hardware-based to the web browser. So if you've ever used Face ID to unlock your phone, or Touch ID, or Windows Hello, or Android Fingerprint, that's all biometric or other kinds of authentication that are really hardware-based. They're tied to your phone. YubiKey is another example. And WebAuthn lets you access that piece of hardware through a standardized interface that's basically just writing JavaScript. So that's the big win, is all your web applications, all your mobile applications that are kind of based on, if they're a PWA, they can get access to that same strong form of authentication that you use to unlock your phone right now.
Right. Makes sense. So it sounds like it's pretty flexible. You can kind of go in a lot of different directions with it.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a replacement for username and password, or an augmentation of it. And I think that the real win is, again, just tying back to making the two things. One is it's more secure and it's much more difficult to phish. Some people say it's impossible to phish. And the other, as opposed to like an SMS or something like that. And the other thing is just removing friction. It's a lot easier to touch your fingerprint to the fingerprint device than it is to enter your username and password to log into something.
So I've only ever seen one website that said that I could log in with WebAuthn, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. I think it basically got me. I think what happened was I said, "Oh, this looks cool. I'll log in with WebAuthn," and then it said, "You don't have WebAuthn set up," and there was no indication of what to do. So I just logged in with Google because,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and so I will say, like, this was standardized in 2018, and I've seen talks and I've seen companies kind of pushing this out. I know Intuit has done this for at least some of their applications. If you go to Best Buy, you can actually see login with WebAuthn. No, they've changed it. Now it's login with passkeys, I believe. And that's actually worth digging into a little bit. Passkeys are kind of the consumer-facing name for this. WebAuthn is the developer-facing name. So when you're trying to build this, you want to Google, hey, how do I build this with WebAuthn? When you're marketing it to your customers, you want to say login with a passkey.
That sounds really smart. I'm so glad that they did that.
Well, I think Apple and Google push them a little bit. I think Apple's pushed them a lot towards that terminology, and I think it's fantastic. And Google and Apple have both had presentations, I think in 2021, about this technology. So it's coming up. I will not say, I think it's probably if you think about the crossing the chasm terminology, it's probably in the early adopters phase, maybe moving a little bit towards the early majority. But the reason why I'm out on this podcast is we just implemented this in FushionAuth. And so we want, frankly, there's two reasons. One, I want you to know about FushionAuth and maybe choose to use our implementation. But second is, I think everyone should at least evaluate this for if you're doing consumer applications and you want people to have an easier login experience, you should absolutely look at this. Now, AJ, sounds like you kind of caught some of the rough edges, and that could be part of kind of where this is. Um, there's we can dig into kind of how you can use WebAuthn if you all want to, but
I'd love to.
it's like any other technology, right? Like it can be used for good or for evil.
Yes, those are the best technologies. Technologies that can only be used for good are typically only used for evil. Trusted platform hardware, for example.
Yeah, I'm going to derail us back onto the topic, though. And what I'd like to start with, because a lot of times we kind of get really deep into the technical details, but where I really like to start, now that we've kind of gotten an idea of what it is and kind of what it does, is what's the value proposition? I mean, for developers, let's say I'm building an app, right? Or I work for a company that's, building an app. Why would I want to adopt WebAuthn, right?
Sure. Yeah. So I unfortunately don't have any hard numbers, right? So
Yeah.
I will actually take it to do to look at them, look for some hard numbers, and then we can put them on the links page afterwards. But
Mm-hmm.
what we see are there really two main purposes. The first is if you have high security needs. This could be something like for a banking application or something like that, where the possibility of someone phishing you is going to have real significant negative ramifications. So WebAuthn can be used as a single factor, right? So it's the only thing that provides login, or it can be a multi-factor solution, the same way as a push notification or an SMS code. But the difference is because of the implementation details, it is really, really hard to phish. They've taken a lot of things that they've seen over the past 10 years in terms of how attackers attack these kind of codes, and they've built it on top of public-private key cryptography, and the private key is stored securely, right, on a device,
Mm-hmm.
a YubiKey or a phone or something, and so it's really hard to phish. So security is one business driver. The second,
Right.
for me, is ease of use. And again, I keep coming back to my first experience with WebAuthn in our implementation. I logged in and basically registered with an account, and then I set up WebAuthn, which, AJ, to your point, we've tried to make simpler, but it is not super intuitive. But once you've set it up once, I
What
could log
does
in.
setting it up mean?
Well, let me just finish this thought, and then I will talk to you about what setting up means. Because
that was my next question anyway.
Yes,
so
totally, yes, that's great. And then I was able to log in with just touching my fingerprint to my Android phone. And it's not perfect, right? Like sometimes my Android phone, the fingerprint reader gets dirty, and so I need to do something about that. But especially when you're on a mobile device, I don't like to have my browser save my passwords. So maybe that's just me, but being able to log in with a fingerprint just made a much smoother experience. So I think those are the two main business drivers. I would say as a developer, like, am I interested in higher security or with, and to be fair, there's a little bit of friction with both of these, or am I interested in a better consumer experience once they've gone through the registration process? So should we talk about the registration process?
Yeah, that's where I want to go next. Because it makes sense. It's harder to phish because you're not sending somebody to a page where it's, hey, enter your username and password to get the thing that I told you was wrong. That's not wrong, because I'm a liar and I'm trying to get your username and password. So, the security, maybe the ease of use, because sometimes it is easier to just authenticate it on my phone, even though I'm trying to get on my computer. Sometimes it's a little inconvenient too. But all of this makes sense to me as far as, providing security and maybe a certain level of, what's the word I'm looking for? Ease of use. And so there's an actual word for that, but I can't think of it at the moment. So convenience, that's what I was looking for. So anyway, so let's say that I decide, this is what I want to do, get away from the username password kind of setup. How do I put this into my app?
Sure. So there's a couple of things. The first is you need to decide how you want to use it. And there's three kind of main big picture options. The first is you can use it as a second factor of authentication, right, which we all are pretty familiar with, right? Google Authenticator or whatnot. You could use it as what we call re-authentication, which is where someone has an account already and they've signed up and they just want to add this as another means of authentication. You could think of that the same as someone putting an email address on their account so that they can get a magic link, right? It's just another way of authenticating someone.
Right.
And the third is you use it for what's called, we call it, it's called, how do I put this? It's called bootstrapping, I believe, or discoverable credentials, where the username, basically your identity is tied to the WebAuthn device, and that is only supported by some WebAuthn devices. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. So let's talk about the re-authentication workflow, because that's probably the one that most of your users or listeners will think about implementing first. And the way that works is I sign up the way I normally would, right? Like I use Google or I use whatever. I sign up with username and password, and then I go to my account and I say I want to add a WebAuthn key, and then I click a button, and then the JavaScript browser APIs are called, and then it prompts me to put a fingerprint on my fingerprint reader, and then that gets recorded in my device and then also on the website. And then the very next time I come through, you can prompt that user and say, and basically you drop a cookie, right? In the web world, or you put a preference. Well, in the web world, you drop a cookie. And then when your website sees that cookie, you can say, hey, do you want to authenticate with WebAuthn? They put the finger on the fingerprint reader, and then they are magically logged in. They don't have to re-enter their username and password ever again. Now, this is on that single browser, on that single device. So you can set up multiple different ones. Now, again, this gets to like some of the there's actually this is WebAuthn 2 I'm talking about. There's actually a WebAuthn 3 that talks about how you can kind of deal with that and work across different devices.
Was there ever a WebAuthn 1?
What happened to WebAuthn 1?
Yeah.
I don't know. I know that there was some other passwordless stuff around the same technology that was done without the W3C by an organization called Fido, which that might have been WebAuthn 1. I'm not really sure. Sorry.
So, I mean, all of us that have Macs have fingerprint scanners. I have never, outside of maybe Safari, paying for something through Apple, I don't think I've ever had the fingerprint scanner be integrated with a website. Does Apple even allow Brave and Firefox and whatever to use the fingerprint scanner, or would I have to buy one of these $150, weirdo looking, can't tell if it's an authentic company or not because I've never heard of it before, things off Amazon?
The answer is you can absolutely use Touch ID on your Mac with WebAuthn to log into web apps if it's been properly implemented. Yes. So because of the support for the standard, all the browsers, which include Safari, Brave, Firefox, although not so great on mobile, Chrome, Edge, they all implement this thing. So they've taken care of kind of the underlying guts and talking to the Touch ID or the fingerprint scanner, the hardware that's built into your computer, and you just need to format the request correctly, go through this registration process, and then next time someone comes in, prompt them to go through the authentication process.
I want to use Face ID. That way my kids can authenticate me in my sleep.
Careful what you wish for, Charles.
Right. Dad, I want this video game. Oh, there we go. All right. I'm a little curious as we kind of pull this together. So you said that keys are generated on both ends, or the key. Anyway, there's an asymmetric key pair, right?
Correct.
That's what I was trying to go to. And so when it generates that key pair, one end stores the private key, the other end stores the public key.
Correct.
And so I'm assuming, because a lot of times these technologies require some kind of server backend ish or something like that, right? And we have a lot of listeners that, yeah, that, Node.js, right? So the backend will handle a lot of this stuff, and you just have to have the right library for it. And I'll ask you about that in a second. But is this something that we can also do on apps that mostly function on the front end, right? I'm thinking like a Next.js or something like that, where effectively I've got a database as a service, and I mean that's pretty much it.
Sure. So I don't have intense familiarity with Next.js, but as long as you have some server-side data store, then you're going to be okay. Well, I should
Okay.
be careful here. I expect you'll be okay because you can store the public key there, right? The private key always stays
Hmm.
on the authenticator. Well, sorry, I just brought a new piece of jargon. The Touch ID, the computer that offers Touch ID, the phone that offers Face ID, etc. Those are called authenticators because they're
Right.
kind of the piece that generates the private key and then publishes the public key up to
Right.
the website. So the website just has to hold the public key, which actually that's another advantage for all your listeners is that you don't have to worry about someone breaking into your website and stealing the public keys because they don't have any value. They're public keys.
Right.
Um, but yes, so that is you have to have some server side storage.
So
Is
effectively, what you're saying then is whether I'm having it send back because it'll send me the public key, and then it'll also send me whatever encrypted payload it has for authenticating the user, right? Um, and so at the end of the day, whether I have Node.js handle that or whether my front end library, does some work on it and then passes that information back to my Firebase or something, either way, that works fine.
Again, I haven't implemented this, but there's no underlying technical reason why it wouldn't work fine, right?
Okay.
If you can store a user's first name, you can store the public key that represents that user in the same space.
Hey, so it turns out that there is a test site, WebAuthn.io, and you can use Touch ID in Chrome. I think the reason that I'd never seen it before is because I have one of those little FIDO keys because I got it through the GitHub developer program, and uh, I think that it just wasn't being implemented in most places. And so when I went to add my FIDO key to my Google account, I think it actually does. The option is called, it's not called Touch ID. The option is called this device. And I never made the connection that that was Touch ID before because the other two options in the list were like, security key. And I don't even remember what the other option was, but it was stuff where it's like, yeah, this is the thing that I know. And the other two things were like, I don't even know if I have those, but it's called this device is the name of the option. They need to rename that to Touch ID when it's Touch ID so that people know it's Touch ID.
Yeah, I mean, and some of that is out of websites control, right? Like some of that could be just Apple like giving you a list of possible capable
It's
devices.
Brave. Brave
Brave.
is giving, well, I mean, Chromium. Chromium is not being specific to what the options are. Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm sure Chromium would be happy to take a pull request from you, AJ.
Oh, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure I'm on their no fly list.
Now that you've mentioned Chromium, I'm a little curious too. Then, if this works there, would this not also work with Electron, right? Which is effectively Chromium with Node.
I would think that if they chose to
I would
implement the
imagine so.
WebAuthn, yeah, I would think so.
That's how
Um,
you do phishing right there. You get the Electron app so that people could be entering in. They think it's for one website, but it's actually coming from an iframe from Electron. That's how you exploit this.
Okay, so speaking of that specifically, yeah, how does WebAuthn tell you I am website A and not website B? Because you could man in the middle of this thing if
yeah,
you don't have a way to authenticate it, right?
and they've actually done a little bit of thinking about that. So one, WebAuthn APIs only work over SSL, and then
Uh-huh.
two, remember that registration process I had you walk through? Like basically, you are tying that private key that's stored on the device on the authenticator to a host name. So if I set up with example.com and then I have my users register on example.com, and then I change my host name to foo.com, they have to re-register all their WebAuthn stuff. So you can't really phish in the same way, right? You can't use example.com and then example like with a Unicode letter
Right.
that looks the same, because the software is going to recognize that and not send on the signed response, basically. So there's protection around that, and that's one of the things I think is just a reflection of WebAuthn being a relatively new standard. You can make it HTTP 1.1. You couldn't say has to be over TLS because back then, not many people were using it. In 2017, 2018, when this was being written, we started to see all of the TLS support across the web. So
another little hiccup. It gives you the option to scan a QR code with your phone. That doesn't work. It needs some sort of special app that iOS doesn't have. So it's not the standard authenticator specification. It's something different, which makes sense because the authenticator is pretty weak if you're considering it for primary authentication.
Sorry, I'm just looking up this WebAuthn.io site because there's a number of sites out there that'll help. This is by Duo, so I don't know how up to date this is or how great this is. It looks pretty solid from here, but I haven't looked at this. So I will say again, like just kind of speaking back, like I think that this is in the early adopter / early majority phase. I think it's going to be really great. I think that there are some, AJ, you've already encountered some user experience issues. So I think that you want to think about, as a developer, like what's the point where I want to jump on board this? And, can I leverage libraries or authentication servers that will help me accelerate that? Because, we all know that an open source library with a lot of eyes on it or a product with a lot of eyes on it will probably be able to push things forward faster to deal with some of these kind of, roadblocks or issues.
Well, I think it's just like when browsers started implementing any security at all for the very first time, and you'd have these pop-ups. Would you like X to be able to access your camera? And then there was the pre-pop-up, which I still think is the right idea both on the phone and the browser. The pop-up says, in order to use this feature, we need access to your camera. Do you want to ask the browser for access to your camera? Ask for access, so you have the double confirm, and then it pops up with the browser dialog, which is ambiguous and unclear. I think the same thing needs to happen here. If somebody selects passkey, then they need to say, before they prompt the passkey prompt, they need to educate the user. Touch ID will be called this device, or you can. They need to know. They need to either be able to provide something, like these are the list of options of WebAuth that I want to allow. I want to allow QR. I want to allow Touch ID. I want to allow FIDO keys or something like that. But somehow, if they can't do that, they just have to educate the user beforehand, because I'm not going to know that a picture of a screen that says this device is Touch ID, because Touch ID is on my keyboard, not on my screen. And I'm not going to know that I have to have some sort of special app on my phone if it says authenticate via QR, because to everyone in the world who's ever used that, well, except for China where they have their own standard, but for everybody in the US, that means the authenticator spec, which I forget what the RFC number is on that, but the same thing that Google and Authy and Facebook.
You're talking about TOTP, that stuff? You're talking about
TOTP. Yeah. Gotcha. That the authenticator. Well, I call it the authenticator spec because that's what the average person doesn't know what TOTP is, but the average person is likely to know what an authenticator app is if they do anything where security is required as part of one of their logins.
Yeah. And I think that points to I think that's why re-authentication is the best workflow to start out with, right? Because you can say, hey, do you want an easier way to log in? And then you can kind of walk people through the step, because I think you're right, AJ. Until we get used to this as consumers, it's going to be a little bit weird. It's going to be a little bit awkward. And I think the win is there in terms of security and in terms of smooth user experience once you actually struggle through things to get it set up. But until then, it is kind of a new thing. I haven't seen that QR code before, but um, I definitely know that we spent a lot of time. The team, I didn't write any code on this, but the team spent a lot of time thinking about like what's the easiest way for people to get WebAuthn enabled for their authentication sites, for their login pages. And we just released the first version. So I'm sure we're going to do some refinement around this because I think it is relatively new and relatively, you know, we're going to learn, I think we, FushionAuth, but we, the developer community, is going to learn a ton about this because I do think that the benefits are enough that this is coming down the pike.
Yeah, one thing that you kind of implied there too with what you're saying that I want to just bring up. So and I'm going to illustrate this with another example. So I was on Twitter this morning, just kind of browsing, before I got in an argument about politics, right? Because that's what Twitter's actually for. Anyway, I'm halfway joking. It was with a high school friend of mine, and we were just having a back and forth. But anyway, somebody had posted that Node.js, it basically said Node.js was a mistake, right? And then, the follow on was effectively, well, I actually use it every day. And what I see in a lot of cases is that something like WebAuthn, it has enough security wins to make it worth it, right? Just kind of like Node.js early on. It gave people some options to use JavaScript in a way that they hadn't been using it before and to do some useful stuff with it, right? It wasn't the ideal tool, but it was something there. And yeah, I think we're going to progress into, just as we have to get to WebAuthn or to the current version of Node, we're going to progress into something that fits the needs for most people. And so, yeah, this might still be a little bit clunky. It might still be a little bit, weird to set up. But at the end of the day, it sounds like the security wins are at least worth considering and may very well be worth the trade-off for you as an app builder. And at the same time, we may get WebAuthn 3 that actually solves some of the issues we are going to wind up having with WebAuthn 2. And at the same time, make everybody's life a little bit easier because, you have heightened security and better ease of use.
Yep. And one other thing, I kind of talked about the host name mapping and the TLS stuff, where you can't use it over non-TLS websites. Another thing that's kind of tied to it is that it really does require a physical person to press a button, right? It's if someone prompts me for a WebAuthn, if I get prompted for a WebAuthn, login to authenticate, there is no code I can send to somebody else. There's no, way that I can share that with anybody who's not physically present with me. And I can't even see the private key, right? Because that's kind of hidden on the device, right, and I can't share that. So that's just another one of the security benefits that I think they've looked at the issues and they're trying to ameliorate some of the issues that have come up around authentication.
Yeah, one thing that you just brought up that's also interesting with this is that in some cases, like I'm using LastPass, for example, for some stuff, right? And it's because I have virtual assistants and audio editors and people that need access to my stuff that's protected by a password. And I could kind of see the need for something like that going away to a certain extent because it's send an authentication request to this person, right, over email or, text, or maybe you have some secure chat or something that you're going to send it to them. They follow that link, they set up their own authentication, and, and then it just allows the dual login as a way of managing stuff, right? And so you get rid of that. And I'm kind of dreaming of the day where that's a thing, because the other thing that I run into is that there are a lot of SaaS products out there that I use, and they want to charge you per seat, per login, per user, whatever. And
well, that's how
I would love to be able to just say, authorize any of these, and then if they wind up moving on to another place to work, then then I can just turn it off. I can just turn off that access.
Well, I got some bad news for you, Charles. I mean, they'll probably just charge per WebAuthn passkey that's been
Probably.
associated with it, right? Like they gotta feed their kids too. But no, yeah, I think that is an interesting way to think about it. Is as a you could have one account that has multiple different passkeys,
Mm-hmm.
and you still control the password,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the day, you can add or remove those passkeys by going through the registration
But
process.
but I can't share my own, biometric or whatever WebAuthn is connecting to. I can't share that with anyone else. I can't say, "Oh, here's my thumbprint," right?
Right. I mean, again, that's where WebAuthn 3 kind of comes in, and Apple's working on some of that, right, to share the
Share
private key that's
access.
generated by the well, I
Right.
don't know the full details of it, but like basically is they want you to be able to log in on the Mac and then be able to be logged in on the iOS device
Mm-hmm.
or vice versa, and that inevitably is going to involve some kind of secure stuff happening over the to a centralized server that Apple will control and run. I can't speak too much to that. I know that is one of the things that they're trying to fix about the WebAuthn 2 spec or improve. An example is, if you set things up as with your Mac and you only have your Touch ID to log in, and then your Touch ID device gets broken, or you set up on your
Oh
phone
yeah.
and then you lose your phone, you're kind of up a creek, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things that you want to make sure that any WebAuthn solution you have allows you to put in 2 or more passkeys, and make sure that you encourage all your users to do that. In fact, I don't know. I might even go so far as to say I don't know if I would want to let someone log in without 2 or more passkeys or some alternative means, right? They could have an email address on
Right.
file, or they could have a password. But WebAuthn alone, because it's tied to that device right now with WebAuthn 2, is a little bit scary for this is the only way in to an application.
Yeah,
So
but
with
nobody's a single device user at this point. I mean,
It's true
honestly,
too.
I'm just, I guess there are parts of the world where maybe that's a thing, but some of the time I'm gonna want to log in on my computer. Sometimes I want to use my phone. Sometimes I want to use my tablet. Sometimes I'm gonna want to use, I don't know, maybe the app actually has WebAuthn because it's built on Ionic or something, right? Which uses WebTech. And so it may have a separate deal than the website. And so yeah, I can imagine that being instead of it being hey, this is this user, it's hey, this is this user with these devices. And so yeah, what you're saying makes sense, but I think realistically you're going to have to solve for that anyway.
That's true. Although I will say that there are some accounts that I have that I don't use on that I don't use cross account, right?
Yeah.
Like some I do, but like if it's just a shopping site and I just want to I'm always going to be shopping on my computer because I have a lot of typing or whatnot. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I hear your point. The greater case is going to be something that you're going to want to make sure that you support.
Yeah, one other thing before I let AJ jump in. How would this work then if I'm like, because sometimes I wind up in a browser, not often, but sometimes I wind up in a browser on a device like my Apple TV or Amazon Fire Stick. How do you authenticate those?
How do you authenticate them without WebAuthn? You use it. You're
It
probably
makes me
using.
use my phone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you probably would use your phone, and then it would just like delegate you use WebAuthn on your
the
phone as opposed
authentication.
to
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, makes sense. AJ, sorry I keep
okay,
cutting you
so
off.
what because I work with Dash Incubator, I am immediately extremely interested in how this could be used for cryptocurrency wallets, because they're way too technical. It's too confusing, it's too scary. If you lose your 12 words, then you lose all of your money. That's
Just
really
use
bad.
FTX.
Oh yeah,
Too soon. Too
you
soon.
got it.
Sorry.
You got it. No, it's I'll pick the breakdown video on that. Anyway, um but just and not just that, because I let's forget that I even said that, because the core issue is not that. The core issue is, how do I, as a non-technical person, have a cryptographically secure seed that I can reproduce and that I don't have to remember? And this sounds like, if I get a couple of FIDO keys and I've got Touch ID on my MacBook, as long as I continually set up whatever it is that requires that cryptographic seed on a new device when I get it, and I always have at least one device that has it, hopefully two, then I could do an N of M key type of thing where any of these three devices can unlock my seed. And that seems really, really interesting to me.
So what you're saying is it's a crypto. Are these crypto wallets websites, or are they?
Let's not
apps?
use that word. Let's not use that word.
Okay.
A random seed. Yeah,
Okay.
I shouldn't have muddied the water by saying that, because it's going to take people down in the wrong direction. The basic idea is I need to be able to generate a private key. I need to be able to generate the same private key every time. I need that private key to be public. I need it to be able to be on my Facebook, on my Twitter, on everywhere. So it needs to be encrypted. I need to be able to have a private key that I could give to every member of my family, all of my friends, put on my website, something that anybody could have. And that is the real whatever it is that accesses. It could be, a home server, it could be a bank account, it could be a crypto wallet, it doesn't matter. But I need a private key that I can publish everywhere in the world and have everybody have access to it, but only I can decrypt it. But I need to be able to decrypt it by more than one means. And it sounds like this could give me a means by which, with one of these, with Touch ID or this key or something. I mean, I'm assuming that WebAuthn has some sort of 32 byte random number associated with it. That's what I'm asking. I'm sorry, I got so excited and my brain's just going all over the place. The question I'm asking is there a 32 byte random number associated with the WebAuthn login that would be suitable for cryptographic applications?
With the WebAuthn login, I honestly don't know. I'm
assuming
here
it
because
creates a user ID that it sends to you, and that user ID has some sort of probably time-based hash component so that you can't do a replay attack. So it probably has a user ID, a nonce, a time component, and then some sort of secret.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's basically signed so. The way that works is that that there is a challenge, which is essentially the nonce. I don't think it's time based, although there may be some. I know there's some time checks that happen in terms of how long you can have an authenticator prompt. But the secret is held is the private key, right? Like this, you sign over the data, and you previously provided your public key. So that's how the website knows that it's you going through that authentication process, is because it's checking the signature of the data that's come back. So I don't see where there's like a 32-bit kind of hanging around, but it's possible you could send down some data. But I guess you're still going to run the issue of like, I mean, at the end of the day, it sounds to me like, why wouldn't you just have a central repository where you could have multiple different accounts log in, and by proving that they've logged in, however they authenticate, but you don't care how they authenticate, then they get access to that secret key. Like, why do you need to like bring? I guess I don't.
No, it's got to be encrypted. You can't put this stuff on a server where anybody willy nilly can just get access to it. No, it's got to be secure. Putting something in plain text on any server is completely insecure, especially in the wake of all we know since Edward Snowden onward. Anybody in the government can have access to anybody's data on Facebook, on Twitter, on Google Drive at any time for any reason without any friction.
So you're saying, how do I use the private key that is available on these authenticators, on my Touch ID, on a YubiKey or something like that? How do I use that to encrypt a value and have that N of M transaction happen so that anybody with one or two of these things can decrypt it to get that special value? Is that what you want, essentially?
Well, yes, but I overcomplicated it in what I was saying because my brain was going 100 miles a minute. What I need to know is, what entropy can I get out of this that nobody else can get? What amount of entropy can I get out of a WebAuthn process that doesn't have to be stored on a server because it has to do with what happens on the FIDO key or in the Touch ID, or it's part of the operating system mechanism, not part of the server mechanism, part of the device and operating system mechanism. Because if I have that, then all the other stuff is just layers, and that's easy to do. It's already solved. There's already libraries for it. It's just I need entropy, and I need to know that entropy exists between the thing that I'm using and the operating system that ostensibly is not compromised.
Sure. Don't got a great answer for you, but I can ask. I can ask some of the devs.
That'd be awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, and we may just post some follow-up stuff on Top End Devs in the comments, or add some, if you get an answer, put it in the show notes. But yeah, for right now, yeah, and I have to say I'm actually gratified that you're willing to tell us you don't know something as opposed to try and make it up. But yeah, so at the end of the day, then it looks like this is something that is definitely worth a look. Are there good places that kind of walk people through WebAuthn, what it, how to put it in and how to, validate that it's working and doing what we expect?
Sure. So, I think the site that there's kind of two sides, right? There's like the consumer facing side and then the developer facing side. And the site that AJ found, the WebAuthn.io, is a good one for consumer facing side. I've seen some other ones as well. The Yubico folks have a pretty great guide that walks through kind of some of the nomenclature of WebAuthn, because there's some words that are special jargon. Like there's like it's instead of a workflow, it's a ceremony to authenticate and things like that. I think I have published a couple of articles, one on the FushionAuth.io website and then one on the Stack Overflow website, which give kind of that high level overview. And then as far as kind of implementation, I think you're going to want to find that library that we're going to do some digging around for. And I'll, whether it's Next.js or pure Node or whatnot. There's kind of two components of the developer side thing that you want to look for in terms of implementation. The first is generating the right options for the JavaScript API, because there's a number of options. Like you can say, hey, you need to generate that nonce that we talked about, or that one-time string. You need to say, hey, do I want to allow I don't know whether we want to get this deep, this technical, but like there's two types of authenticators. There are ones that are tied to a device, and then there's ones like Touch ID, and then there are ones that you can move between devices, like YubiKeys. And so you can actually say, hey, I don't want to authenticate for this authentication event. I don't want to use any passkeys that are tied to a YubiKey. I only want the ones that are tied to the Mac, or vice versa. And there's some other things like that. So you have to kind of generate those things correctly and understand those. And the spec is really good about that. And then there's the whole then there's the whole prompting process and storing the public keys. And that is something that there's a few libraries out there for that. I've seen them in Python. I'm sure they exist in JavaScript as well. But that's a whole separate set of things that aren't defined by the standard at all. That's just more like, okay, when do I prompt someone to sign up for a WebAuthn, to give me their passkey? And when do I prompt them again? And how do I store that the credentials that are given to me? They're not credentials, sorry, they're a public key essentially, safely. And how do I prevent that UX to like give people the option to sign up with multiple passkeys, things like that. And that I haven't seen as much standardization around.
I want to lament that Google does not actually implement WebAuthn. Whatever it implements only allows FIDO keys. I can add Touch ID to my GitHub account. I'm assuming I can do that with my NPM account, which I'm trying to do right now. Cannot do it with my Google account. Totally pissed off. You need to personally go rag on Google to make them adopt this thing. I'm counting on you, Dan.
Sure. Well, I mean, I appreciate your trust, but when you say Google doesn't support that, like you're going to your personal Google account and you're saying, hey, I want to add WebAuthn, and it doesn't support adding a passkey there?
None of these call it WebAuthn or passkey. They call it security key, or
Sure.
it's just under security as add 2FA. So under Google, it's okay. It's under security, and then it's under two-step verification. Then it's under security key, which if you already have a security key, it will show up as if that's the option and there's no option to add it. But then if you click on your existing security key, then it takes you to a security keys page where you have the add security key option. If you click that, then it will ask you if you want to do phone or physical key. And if you click physical key and next, it pops up and then it goes through the browser's FIDO process, but it does not have the this device option for Touch ID.
So my guess is that is a situation. Remember, I talked about the whether you can differentiate whether you want to allow like a YubiKey or allow like an authenticator that's tied to a device. They may not just support that, right? And they may not support that for the reasons that we talked about, where if it's tied to my Mac and my Mac gets busted, then suddenly I'm locked out of that, or I can't use that key anymore. I'm not saying they should, but that to me that's what that sounds like, is that they haven't done that.
Except that I already have a key, so that's already debunked. But also, I had this problem yesterday on my phone. I basically I just had to switch browsers because on one browser in Brave on my phone, it wasn't letting me log into my Google account. So I wanted to access settings,
Mm-hmm.
and it wanted me to two-factor, and then I did my authenticator two-factor, and then it came back and wanted me to three-factor. So I did my password, I did my two-factor, and then the only options it gave me were insert a security key or use some other thing, which was probably related to Google's proprietary app, that their own proprietary technology that they developed, that's apart from WebAuthn, that they have apps and hardware integration for. And so and on my phone, of course, I don't have a USB-C port,
Right.
because it's iOS. And so I can't stick in my YubiKey anyway. So I had no way to log in to get to access these settings on my phone. Then I switched browsers, and then I did the second factor authentication, and then it just let me through. So I guess it liked Safari more than it liked Brave.
Okay. Well, I will call Google and I will give them your feedback, AJ.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, because I think it's going to mean a lot more coming from you than it will mean coming from me.
All right. Well, I'm going to move us into picks. AJ, I'll let you go first. What are your picks?
I'm going to pick that video about the whole FTX thing if I can find it. But it kind of explains how the whole thing is just a huge, huge, huge sham. Because this is the guy, if you remember a couple months back, how there was this big market crash where somebody just dumped $500 million in a single transaction. And by doing that, it caused granted, it's all Ponzi scheme pyramid stuff anyway, so they're all at fault. But there was some sort of, I think the exchange was based out of Korea, but it was like the largest competitor to FTX other than Bitnami or whatever that other thing's called, Binance. Sorry, Bitnami, whatever you are. And but doing the $500 million dump, he probably had some insider information from somebody about how their algorithm worked and knew that if he dumped over a certain amount that it would cause their algorithms to go haywire and then collapse the market. Anyway, the dude is literally in bed with this SEC director's daughter. And so that's how they got the knowledge about how to set up everything in the Bahamas just right so that they can be completely shielded from any liability. And now he's all buddy-buddy with the SEC saying, oh, well, it was just a mistake of risk. And so we need more government regulation to help poor people like me to not make such bad decisions. So the whole thing is just a big loop-de-loop of causing problems, making billionaires, and exploiting people's tax dollars and trying to make it so that the average people will never have a non-fiat digital currency that is that can reach mass adoption. It is a big, huge, and again, it's a conspiracy because it's literally different people who are, they're clearly conspiring, because they're, when you dump $500 million to shut down somebody else's business, that is conspiracy. You had to conspire with other people to arrange things to get the situation set up so that you could destroy their business, right? That's what that is. That's not fair market play. Anyway, so I'll find that video and then link it. I'm super stoked that I can use Touch ID with GitHub, and I will find out momentarily if I can use Touch ID with NPM, but I'm suspecting that I'll be able to, and so I'm really ecstatic about that. And I just did it. Yes, you can use Touch ID with NPM. So now I have my Touch ID is registered with NPM. Now the question will be, is it Touch ID on different, is it different keyboards, or is it just on the operating system level? I suspect it's the operating system level. That's super exciting. And let's see, is there anything else that I can think of recently in terms of apps that I've used or just cool stuff? I don't know. I've been really, oh, actually, no, I've got one other thing. So, Raspberry Pi is just not powerful enough to run Plex. And I can't quite pick this yet because I haven't run it through the paces, because I just got it set up on Saturday and I haven't really done much with it yet. But you can get a Dell OptiPlex microcomputer, which I'm calling mine Microplex because that's a quadruple entendre right there. And it's $120. Actually, it looks like I bought one of the last ones, but I'm sure that they'll come back in stock again. So these micro Dell OptiPlex microcomputers, I got the 7050, which my buddy told me was going to be enough to be able to do at least one stream of 4K transcoding on the fly. So I believe it's going to be at least, good enough for 1080, which, to be honest, you can't tell the difference between 1080 and 4K unless you're, 3 feet from the screen. But anyway, so it's really cool that basically something that's less than the cost of what a Raspberry Pi 4 is right now, probably sipping a little bit more power, but not much, because everything I've got connected. And let me see what the kilowatts says right now. Anyway, I'm really glad that I'm going to be able to get Plex working better, because my wife's been complaining about it. Okay, I'm with like 5 computers and 5 monitors and a bunch of other stuff. I'm less than 200 watts of power right now, so that thing's not. I think it's sipping 10 or 20 watts or something. But yeah, so now I can get my Plex set up to work better, and then hopefully it won't be upsetting my wife when it has to buffer for 10 seconds before being able to play it. So,
first world problems. The streaming box in my house is too slow.
We got to get our Harry Potter on.
Right?
Well, outside of the first world, they don't have this problem because they can buy a flipping DVD and expect it to work. Well, I mean, I guess we still can, but that's what I'm preparing for, because in the near future, you're not going to have access to anything that you didn't get on DVD and Blu-ray. You're going to have access to it at the whims of whoever owns the rights to it that month. So.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I've felt that a few times, but yeah. Interestingly enough, you brought up Plex, and I guess I will segue into my picks, but this wasn't something I was going to pick. I actually have my dad's old computer here that apparently has more than enough juice to run Plex, and so I was working on setting that up here, because over the years we've bought hundreds of DVDs and CDs, and anymore we just want to stream stuff. And so yeah, the idea behind having a media machine in the house that'll just do the stuff sounds terrific. I just installed Ubuntu on it, and apparently you can run Plex on Linux. I was looking for Windows, like to be able to install Windows, and I couldn't find a cracked version that I trusted enough to install it, and it was like $100 or something, or $150 for a license for Windows 10, and I was like, no, I want to do the project, but not that badly. So, yeah, if it'll run nicely on Linux, I'll just Linux the thing and let it rip. I may have questions for AJ though as I get it set up, but pretty happy and excited about that. He is talking on mute, so I'm sure he's saying something brilliant.
Oh, I was saying it's basically you just copy and paste.
Yeah.
Also, actually, no. There's one other thing that I'm gonna retro pick now. Umbrel has come onto my radar and is now interesting to me. I think there's a lot of stuff they're getting right. I think there's a lot of stuff they're getting wrong. But you can put Umbrel. You can run a curl bash to put Umbrel on a system, and it seems like it's a series of Docker containers or something, and it will install self-hosted options as apps. So they have a self-hosted option of Uptime Robot, which somebody else creates. They just created the Docker container in the system by which it deploys and maps ports and all that,
right?
So that you get a click button Synology like experience of installing apps onto your Raspberry Pi or to something like the OptiPlex or whatever.
Yeah.
And Plex is one of those options. So if you copy and paste for Umbrel, you can get a whole bunch of other stuff in addition to Plex, and Plex is just click a button. But Plex is, if you've already got it set up, getting it set up on a new computer on Linux is you just copy and paste and then it goes.
Yeah. Yep. Makes sense. Yeah. And so then I just have to figure out how to, rip the CDs or DVDs if it's not a standard thing, and then just stick it on there. But anyway, as far as the Dell Optiplex pick goes, I actually was in a little bit different position. So I was looking for computers for my kids. And in particular, they had some Chromebooks. And my 11-year-old has this penchant to throw fits and then throw things. And he had broken all of the Chromebooks except one. He's paying for it. Another conversation. But anyway, so we were looking for, some cheaper option, because the Chromebooks, we either found them on like a surplus from a school, or so we didn't pay full price on them, but still, like, to replace them, it's, unless we find another surplus deal, it's $100 a pop, give or take. So, I was looking on Walmart.com, and we found some machines that look a whole lot like these Dell Optiplexes that AJ's talking about, and they were like $70 a piece, and they have Windows 10 on them, so they'll update. We can run the security updates and stuff on them. And then the other part of that is that they're also up to date enough to where we can install, like, my 11-year-old really loves playing Roblox, and so we could put that on there, and then I can sit down and play it with him. And so just stuff like that, right? So that was a tremendous deal. I mean, they were rehabbed, right? So somebody else had owned them and given them back to Walmart. But yeah, they were like $70 a piece, and so that turned out to be a good deal. And it included the keyboard and mouse and everything else with it. I think the only thing I had to figure out was putting monitors on them, and I have plenty of extra monitors around here, so that worked out. Another pick just alongside that is, and this is something AJ may be able to take advantage of, but I'm sure there are other similar deals out there, is so the local university, BYU, they actually have a surplus that they sell all their surplus IT stuff off. And so you can get, I mean, obviously it's not top of the line because they're selling it off, but you can get all kinds of stuff. You can get projectors, you can get computers, you can get TVs, all of their stuff goes through there. I think the last email I got from them was taxidermy, right? And so they'd had a whole bunch of taxidermy animals that they were, surplusing. So, but usually it's technology and office furniture. And so I've never needed 100 chairs, which is usually what they're doing with the chairs. But you can go pick up a desk. You can go pick up, like I said, a computer or a projector or whatever, and you can get it for a pretty darn good deal. So You know, and it's just whatever they have. So you're not always seeing what you want, but you just go to surplus.byu.edu if you're here in Utah. And then I'm sure there are other places. The local school district also tends to surplus stuff, but they tend to do it in, what's the word for a big batch? They do it by the pallet, kind of. And so it's like you can get a killer deal on Chromebooks, but you have to buy 100 of them, right? And I'm trying to remember where they surplus their stuff. So I'll look that up in a second and give you the website for that. But that website services organizations like that from all over the U.S. And so if you're looking for surplus stuff, the furniture they tend to sell off one at a time, unless it's, you know, like chairs or, you know, something that you would want a lot of. But yeah, they've had pretty decent deals on those. Some of the stuff's not worth buying, but you can browse through it. And they also have like books and lots of things like that. So I'm going to pick that. AJ got me going on all this other stuff. The thing I usually start with is a board game. And we are heading into Christmas. And so, of course, you know, I know people are doing like Advent of Code. But one of our friends gave us an Advent calendar. The one we're going through is the one from 2 years ago. But it's an escape room game calendar, and we're doing it with the kids, and they're having a good time going through it with us. It's called Exit the Game Advent Calendar. And I'll put a link to it in the show notes, but effectively, what it is you open a door, so, you know, like you do on a regular Advent calendar. And what we get is we read the story, it tells us to open the door, we pull the cards out, and then we have to solve the puzzle in order to find the next door. And so, you're trying to find 3 numbers, and if you get the right 3 numbers in the right order, then what you do is you flip the thing where you dial the numbers in over, and it gives you direction. So it's like up and to the right, up and to the left, down 1, and then it also has shapes on it, so you can check and make sure you got the right door, right? Just based on those directions. And so you get to check your work, and then that's the door you open next time. And my kids have really enjoyed it. They haven't been too terribly difficult to figure out. And they do have hints that you can check in the other booklet. So one's the story booklet and the other one's the hints. And if you know, the first is just kind of a more generic hint. The second one's a little more specific, and the third one's like the actual solution, like how you solve it. And so, you know, if you're getting stuck, you're not going to stay stuck. But anyway, it's been really fun. They've been enjoying it. Board Game Geek weights it at 2.09, so it's pretty approachable to anybody who likes, you know, playing games, stuff like that. So that's my board game pick. I'm also excited about our book club. Looks like Bob Martin's going to be able to make it to most of these. And it's clean architecture. We're doing clean architecture starting on Wednesday.
I started it already. Time. I love it.
Yeah. So we're going to be.
I might join in.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have a membership, either a Top End Devs membership or just the book club membership, then you can jump in with that. But I am excited to be talking about it. And yeah, we're getting all that stuff together. And then I've been talking to some folks about, you know, some of the stuff. So like I had some people whose employer bought them access to like one of the conferences or something. And, you know, they're like, we didn't get the email. And, you know, some of it, I hadn't set it up to send out an email in those particular circumstances, realized I needed to. And I've been using Spark Post for that, and I really like it. So I'm going to pick Spark Post as an email provider. Part of the issue is I've had issues with SendGrid. That's the one that I think most people use. Mostly just getting support, right? If I run into something, they just haven't been great. So anyway, I'm going to pick Spark Post. And one last thing that I'm going to just shout out about is if you're trying to run a business, So for a while back, I switched over to hey.com for my email, and I was using hey.com, and I really like it. There are a lot of things I really like about hey.com, but the issue is that doing any kind of automated anything with it, outside of the couple of automations they've built into it, it's impossible. And, if I'm trying to reach out to sponsors or conference speakers or podcast guests or anything like that, I went and I set things up in Podio so I could do a lot of that stuff. And Podio does a good job of a good chunk of it, but it was just this hassle because it's not right there in my inbox. And so I've gone back to Google, and I've been using Gmailius again. And so I'm going to pick those. I'm going to pick Google Mail. Mine's on a domain. And I'm not in love with them, but it allows me to do the other stuff because everything integrates with it. And
I'm
then
still looking for a
Gmailius.
solution.
Yeah, there's just it stinks. If any of these would build an automation to something other than Google or Microsoft, because Outlook.com, most of them integrate with that too. I'd probably switch to that, but none of them are doing it. So anyway, those are my picks. Dan, do you have some shout outs, picks?
I do. So I'm late to the game here, but I actually just watched the Station 11 miniseries off of HBO, and I think it was HBO. It was amazing. So Station 11 is like kind of a post-pandemic dystopian apocalyptic book, and they did a phenomenal job with this 10-part series. It's kind of a one and done, turning the book into a miniseries. But I really, really enjoyed the characterization. I enjoyed the affirmation of life. I enjoyed the mystery. And I think I have not read the book yet, but I actually just got the book and I'm planning to read it. But I think they did a fantastic job with that. So love Station 11. Now, you may not want any kind of pandemic literature, but I really enjoyed it. Maybe you want to cut that part, I don't know. And then I also want to dive into the WebAuthn level 3 spec. So I kind of mentioned that a couple times in this podcast. I think that it is phenomenal that they're going to do another round and smooth out some of the edges. But so I'm excited to dig into that. So those are kind of my picks.
Awesome. If people want to connect with you online, where do they find you?
Sure. So if you want to learn more about FushionAuth or WebAuthn or OAuth, OIDC in general, you can go to FushionAuth.io. If you want to find out more about what I think and some of my thoughts about technology and society and other things in general, like, what Twitter's for, as you said, Charles. You can find me on Twitter at moreds.com. That's Moore. D as in Daniel, S as in Sam. And I talk about OAuth and OIDC and technology. And then I also had my most recent poll was, what do you think about persimmons? Or have you tried a persimmon? Because I actually had one and it was pretty enjoyable. Actually, that should be, maybe I'm going to take a page out of AJ's book. That's a retro pick. I think persimmons are a delightful fruit, and I'm looking forward to doing more with persimmons.
Hurrah!
I don't think I've ever even seen one. So
It looks like a orange tomato on the outside and a spiced apple on the inside.
And it tingles your mouth. It's the one of the, or at least the one I had. Apparently there are multiple different varieties that you can buy.
I think it's how ripe it is. I think the more ripe it is, the less it tingles, but I could be mistaken.
awesome. I've had some other stuff that tingled my mouth, but I've had some stuff that numbed my mouth, and I still don't understand why people enjoy that. I mean, it was a little bit weird, but it wasn't unpleasant. I don't know. Anyway, thanks for coming, Dan, and thanks for showing up, AJ. We'll jump off, and until next time, Max out.